All right, welcome back. Elections and media. Let's get it. All right, so we have two types of elections. We have primary elections and a general election. In a primary election, what you're doing is you're voting for which candidate you want to represent your party in the general election. So the winner of a primary gets to be their party's candidate. That doesn't mean that they necessarily win office. Primaries are held both in presidential and congressional elections. Talking now mostly about presidential primaries, they're held in all 50 states, and the winner in each state, they receive delegates. These are people who commit to vote for that candidate at the national convention. Some states have open primaries while others have closed. Open primary states allow the person to vote, the citizen I'm talking about now, can vote in either party's primary. So you would walk up, they would ask you, are you participating in the Democratic or the Republican primary today? And you would tell them and you'd vote in that primary. You can't do both, you have to choose. Closed primary though, you can only participate if you are registered to that party. All right, so briefly the difference between a primary and a caucus. A primary is an election. It's where you go and you vote, you stand in line, you get a ballot, you go, you vote in secret behind a curtain kind of thing. Caucus, on the other hand, is a meeting of party members. So you're voting in front of other people. You're discussing and debating which candidates you want, that kind of thing. Iowa is the most famous caucus. It's the first event of the primary season, and it's a caucus. The way that you actually become your party's nominee for president is by winning a majority of delegates at the national convention. So that's where you formally are chosen. So you have all these primaries that go on for about 6 months from January through June. And then usually it's August or so, you have the national convention, and the delegates that you won by winning those states back in those months before, they show up at the national convention and now they vote for you there. Primaries have made the nomination process more democratic and have taken away control from political parties because now the citizens have a lot more influence and ability to choose their party's candidate for the presidency. All right, so once we get to the general election for presidency, we have the Electoral College is how the president is actually chosen. They officially elect the president. The Electoral College was originally intended to be a guard against participatory democracy. Remember, not trusting the people, fearing mob rule, that kind of thing. So you have these people from each state that are part of the Electoral College, and they formally vote for the president. Now, we have 538 total electoral votes. You need a simple majority, 270 to win. The popular vote, meaning the nationwide popular vote, does not matter. How do we choose which 538 people will be members of the Electoral College? Well, that's up to each state. 48 states do it in a winner-take-all fashion, in which essentially whichever candidate wins their state, wins the most votes in their state, even if it's by one single vote, that candidate will win all of the electoral votes from that state. All right. The other two states split it up by congressional district. It's Maine and Nebraska, but the main question you'd probably have on an AP test is the winner-take-all feature. So win by one vote in a state, and you get all of that state's electoral votes. As a result of this, candidates focus on just a few states. Swing states or battleground states. These are states that are both large, so they have a large number of electoral votes, and are also competitive. So states like Texas and California that are large, they are not competitive, so candidates don't focus on them. They focus on states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, states that have a decent number of electoral votes and are also competitive. If no candidate wins 270 electoral votes, then the election is decided by the House of Representatives. Despite its unpopularity at times, why is the Electoral College still around? Well, it would require a constitutional amendment to alter or to abolish it because it was formed in the original Constitution and then again changed by the 12th Amendment. So one of your big questions in this course is, does the Electoral College facilitate or impede democracy? And I give you a few arguments on each side. So what's good about the Electoral College? It could prevent mob rule by uninformed voters. It allows states to have some importance in choosing the president. It can ensure that candidates have to appeal to all voters, not just densely populated areas, which might happen without the Electoral College. On the other hand, We could say that voters today have access to more than enough information so they can make informed decisions, so that mob rule isn't quite as scary anymore. It gives too much power to voters in swing states compared to everybody else. That it's anti-democratic because it doesn't take into account the popular vote. And because it's winner take all in 48 states, it discourages third parties, which is also undemocratic. All right, shifting to congressional elections, there is something known as the incumbency advantage. This is where the incumbent candidate wins 90% of the time in congressional elections, and you have a number of advantages listed there for you. Midterm elections, these are the ones between presidential elections. They have lower voter turnout than presidential elections, and as a result, the electorate is typically much more partisan. These are people who are strongly Democratic or strongly Republican. More often than not, the president's party loses seats in these elections. It's often a vote checking the power of the president in a midterm election. It happened to Trump in 2018, it happened to Obama in 2010, and again in 2014, happened to Bush in 2006. It's what usually happens. Presidential elections are more competitive than congressional elections. So usually the presidency is like within a 55 to 45% vote, whereas most congressional elections, the winner has more than 60% of the vote. There is an incumbency advantage for the president as well. The president is very well known. He has command of the bully pulpit, which we talk about, the idea that he can just speak on a matter and it becomes news. He has the attention of the media at all times, has experience winning a presidential election already has that network of contributors and staff and volunteers, and is already seen as presidential, so these factors can help the president to win re-election. All right, in recent times we have some changes happening to political campaigns. We have the rise of political consultants. These are hired professionals, and it's their job to help that person win. So these are oftentimes people that are good with advertising and PR and that kind of thing. So they aren't necessarily about the policy, they're just about helping you win. Campaigns have gotten much, much more expensive, and as a result we have a huge focus on fundraising efforts. So hundreds of millions of dollars. Obama actually in 2012 crossed the $1 billion mark for fundraising. We have long election cycles, essentially 2 years at this point is when you have candidates start announcing, and they're even kind of informally running even earlier than that. So very long election cycles. You have 6 months of the actual primary, and then you get to the general election, so it's a long cycle. And we have an increasing reliance today on social media for communicating with the public and for asking for money and fundraising. All right, so shifting gears to the media, we see lots of changes there as well. We know that political participation is influenced by media coverage, by commentary on political events, so it's quite important because it connects people, again, a linkage institution connecting people to the government. We have this change from newspapers, then shifting to radio, TV, to cable, to internet, now to social media as being the main form of where people receive their news from. What's happening more and more is we have this ideologically driven news, especially through social media, which reinforces existing beliefs. So people who are conservative tend to follow other conservatives on social media, liberals liberal, libertarians, etc. And so kind of end up in this bubble of this thought reinforcement. Narrowcasting similarly, so whereas Fox News targets conservatives and older people, MSNBC tends to target a younger, more liberal audience, so again, focusing their coverage on specific people. Again, that's going to lead to this ideologically driven programming. So, the level of political knowledge among citizens is impacted by a number of these things. We have more choices than ever before when it comes to media, but like the last slide talked about, oftentimes these are ideologically oriented. So we have lots of choices, but we end up going to the same ones that kind of reinforce or confirm our previously held biases. We have consumer-driven media outlets. Again, their goal is to make money, and it is driven by that goal, so they're going to give the people what they want, which is often more dramatic and less substantive news coverage. There's also rising uncertainty over the credibility of news sources and information. All right, and lastly, roles of the media. Gatekeeper is very important. This is where news media decides what to talk about, what to publish or not to publish. So they influence what we know about we as the public, which influences the policy agenda. This is through agenda setting because, again, the idea here is the news reports on something, it becomes an important issue to the public, and then the public demands action by policymakers. So if something isn't reported on, then that doesn't take place. Whereas if something is reported on quite a bit, it can become part of the agenda, even though it might not be as important. Watchdog role is where the media will scrutinize, conduct investigations. And then we have scorekeeper. And most related to this is horse race journalism. This is something the media does quite a bit. Focus on the polls, on who's winning, who's losing. How does a certain passage of a bill, who wins and who loses from that politically? As a result, citizens are often less informed because rather than talking about the substantive issues, about the differences in the policy platforms of particular candidates, we're just focusing on, well, this person's up by 2% today, and oh look, they lost 2%, their campaign is over. So people are being less informed, and it could additionally possibly lead to a bandwagon effect in which people assume somebody's going to win, so they vote for them because they think, well, if I vote for the loser, they're not going to win anyway, so I might as well jump on the bandwagon. Alright, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button for me if this video helped you at all. Make sure to check out the rest of the series. This has been a Money production.